I'm Rose Dioro, and welcome to the Rosemoor Roundtable, a limited discussion series hosted by myself and Samantha Brentmoor, covering a range of topics specific to the romance audiobook industry. This second roundtable discussion centers on how producers cast and discover new talent for audiobooks. Today, we welcome 3 producers, each with a unique perspective on the topic. The Rosemoor Roundtable is recorded over a live stream and produced and distributed by Brickshop Audio in podcast format. Without further ado, here's your moderator for today, Samantha.
Thank you, Rose. Very excited for today's discussion. I think a lot of people are very interested in this topic, and I think all of us have really unique perspectives to bring to this. So I'm going to dive right in with some introductions so everybody knows who we are, and we can talk about where we act as producers or casting directors and how long we've been in that role. So I'll go first. I'm Samantha Brentmoor. I produce with Brickshop Audio, and I've been in that role with them since 2018.
Hi, I'm Katie Robinson. I'm with Lyric Audiobooks. I've worked in audiobooks for about 8.5 years, but I've only been with Lyric for a little over 4. And I just moved into the executive producer position back in September when I acquired the company from Andy.
Yay.
Hi, I'm Jeff. I'm the casting director at Recorded Books. I've been the casting director there for about 7 years, but I've worked at Recorded Books for longer than that in other capacities.
Amazing.
And my name's Shane, and I work for East House Productions, which is my production company, which I started in a very small way, probably 4 or 5 years ago. Now, let's pick up this other thing.
So I'm going to start by zooming us out and talking about rosters, the rosters we keep, how we have talent, with a big chonky question, which is, do you, in your role as a producer or casting director, have any kind of general philosophy or approach to the talent roster that you keep? And I'm going to kick it off to Jeff first on this one.
Sure. Yeah. Ideally, we like to get people into the theater experience because we find that translates very well. That's kind of where we start. So when we're looking at people to add to our roster, yeah, that's a main thing that we look for. We like to pull from the theater world as much as we can. That's not to say we don't pull from film or TV. We certainly do, and we certainly take people, that just have a narration experience.
Certainly. And is there a size that you try to generally keep that list in?
No, although we're continually inviting people to audition, and we're always trying to make our lists bigger. But at the same time, we try to keep going back to the same people over and over again, right? So ideally, once we start to work with somebody, we have a relationship where we can do, 10 or 12 books a year. It just that makes everything flow better, right? That the narrators get better, the more experience they have, and our relationship becomes kind of stronger and easier the more projects we work on together.
Right. That makes total sense. And Shane, for you, as a smaller company that you said has sort of grown over time, where is your kind of thought process on keeping a roster?
My place in this firmament, my place is very boutique, right? So it's just me and an assistant still, which is great because it started as me narrating, and then people came to me and asked, I don't know how to turn this into a book, an audiobook. Would you narrate on it and do it? And I was like, yeah, I can figure that out. I know all this stuff by now. So then I did. So that was based, just to give you a background, that was my process. So my process on keeping a roster was just kind of because I'd worked with so many people at that point. So I knew a lot of voices that way intimately. I knew how people worked. And then I just kind of had my names, and I kept adding to a list of names. And it was only the last couple of years that I then, I guess, turned it into more of an actual full-on roster, sent out questionnaire. So it wasn't just all in my brain, kind of going down with the notes, and with my assistant and stuff. We just kind of streamlined it into this thing and got all the information as much as possible. And that way brought other people, sent out to, because I get recommendations. I don't know about you guys, probably do too. People say, oh, you should listen to so-and-so, listen to so-and-so. So I'll listen, and then if I like them, I'll approach, and I get people approaching me. So it's just kind of built on itself with me being a bit more methodical the last couple of years. And You know?
Right.
Getting all
And
the
it's
info.
And has it grown as well? Because it sounds like the work that you were doing and producing largely started out with you as at least one of the narrators. And has that work also changed with what East House is overlooking?
Yeah, I think that's happened for a lot of people in my sort of position, where people come to you originally. I mean, because it's predominantly romance. There's been a few other things, but it's romance. And then they'll come to me because they want me to be on it.
Right.
And that's how it started. But yes, as that's grown, I've then got those authors have stayed with me, and then they say, "Oh, I have another book, but it's American people now. So can you do
get
that?
Out of here."
Yeah, we don't need you and that funny accent.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of grown, and then they recommend people, and I think it's just kind of, I've done it more word of mouth. I haven't been as sort of structured in, because I still narrate a lot and I love doing that. So
Yeah.
Then people, it's kind of grown and mushroomed out into, oh, you can also produce it doesn't have to just be with you. And I'm like,
Right.
Absolutely. So then,
Right.
I mean, you probably found that yourself.
Yeah, no, absolutely, for sure. I mean, I feel like at Brickshop, I started more as a producer focus first before I started navigating, submitting myself as a narrator. And then, now that I'm doing more romance stuff, it is sort of coming through and going, okay, well, who do we have? And is it with me or with somebody else?
Mm-hmm.
So, Katie, you are definitely with Lyric, squarely doing romance work, but with a huge range and depth. So talk to me about your kind of philosophy and approach to building and keeping and maintaining your roster.
Yeah, it's kind of a mix, I guess, of Jeff and Shane's methods. So very similar. We don't have what I call like a traditional roster. We do have, though, like Jeff kind of explained, people that we like to work with over and over again, just because they're used to our processes and our expectations with them are always met and we know what to expect. But we also have kind of what I call our like secondary list. So if a new narrator reaches out to us and they really want to work to us or with us, even if they're just new to me, not necessarily brand spanking new, they fill out a form and that populates like a table in Airtable that is next to where we store all of the information for our ongoing narrators. So essentially, when we have a new project, sometimes, an author might come to us and say, I want Shane or I want Samantha Brentmoor. And, the casting process is simple. And the authors are very familiar with who our repeat narrators are. But luckily, we also have just as many authors coming to us saying like, hey, I kind of have like this voice in mind. I'm not so sure. And that's when we go over to our extra list. That's like, okay, who have we not worked with yet that we can like pull over and try something out with? And we can search by all of our notes that they've filled in through the form. So if somebody with an accent that we need or, something like that, or if they've made a note, I actually ask like, which lyric author do you most want to work with? So then when I get when I get an author that requests a new narrator, I'll search by author to see if anyone mentioned them, that kind of thing. Yeah.
People do get in touch with me and with the other guy who does casting, and that's always okay. Like I'm happy to get those emails. We don't respond to all of them because we can't, but we do keep them, and we do hire people that way. So it's not like that never happens. I'm always willing to hear from folks. And like the best way to do it is to email us and just attach a couple samples. And we really do hold on to that stuff.
It's true.
Yeah. I think people think that we don't or we ignore them, but we actually don't. We actually kind of look at everything. We just don't respond to everything.
Yeah. Well, it would take up like your entire day if you were responding to every email all the time.
It would, and we really do like to keep, sort of like what Katie said, we have our primary folks that we want to keep busy all the time. We want to keep them working with us. We don't want them to feel like they don't have work coming. Yeah, we want to keep that relationship tight. And so it is sometimes challenging to bring new people in. But then there are times, where we get hit with, a couple hundred books at once, where we are kind of reaching out to everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I find that like I sort of think of my roster both in terms of like, there are people that we know that we've worked with a lot that sit in a tier that I go, this person I'm going to have to book so far in advance. I want to, and that bench is great. And there are titles that I'm going to want to put them on. There's another bench that I want of people that I know are going to be available with, shorter notice. And also getting a sense, particularly with romance, a really clear sense of the type of content people want to do, because sometimes I'll get things to come in and know it's not a fit or it's not something that they're comfortable with. And then for us, we do a lot of like really identity specific nonfiction work. And so also making sure that we have this like deep and diverse bench of, different voices that would be appropriate for that stuff. And that's why the cold inquiries are great, because I always have a spot that I'd want somebody to go. But the regulars, there's a certain workflow that it's, how to deliver the files. I know what your voice sounds like in all of its sort of iterations. So also, as I'm pairing you to a project, it's a voice I'm very familiar with, and I'm confident in submitting you.
And I will add, sorry to interrupt, but I would just to add with the cold emails, because as a, I guess as an actor, it was now, I feel like years ago, but still a voice actor, but like all of that, like throwing stuff out and never hearing and never knowing. It's the same. I do get all that stuff, and I often will take that email address and I will put it in the, if I like the stuff, I will put it in my database thing. And then there will come a point where I might like get Josephine to reach out, which is what I did last year, and just kind of follow up on all these people and get their full proper information. And even when I just sometimes have if I don't have all of their stuff and I've noted that I like this person, their name, their email address, and some details. Then if stuff comes in, you might suddenly hear from me out of the blue. I might suddenly want a sample. So it's true. It's like I might not respond, but I may well have taken it and filed it away.
We used to respond to everybody. Like we used to really,
wow.
Between Nick and I, we would. But unfortunately, what happened was I think we were giving people sort of like false hope in a way, and not false hope because they weren't good narrators, but just because there are only so many jobs to go around in a given month.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, so
I will mention, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
Just on the topic of emails. For cold calls, I just wanted to mention that I will respond, and I love when a narrator is like, hey, I have availability in May or June this week. That is like, I think especially in this industry and with just the way romance is, sometimes things move really fast. And if I have a new script that comes in and the author's just like, I don't know, I'm behind schedule, like just cast who you can. That's like the first place I go, is kind of like Jeff and Shane were both saying, like I have a folder and I just go in and I'm like, okay, who was it that said they had availability like this month? Like, like last week, maybe they still do. So that's like the one where I will automatically respond, like, thank you for telling me. And I will tell all of my producers, like, hey, just so you know, so-and-so has availability in May, like reach out if you have something last minute. So that's really useful.
I also sometimes just think people are busy all the time, so sometimes I do appreciate people reaching out and being like, oh no, I actually do have an opening next month. Because what started to happen, and this is a pretty new thing, is that people book out like 6 months to a year. I mean, that didn't used to, 3 or 4 years ago, that wasn't the case. And now, you've got to. So sometimes I assume people are busy and they actually have an opening. So it's always nice to hear.
Yeah, I mean, with my like narrator hat on, I find I do the reach out if the last few times we've talked and I've been booked. And I all of a sudden see the light at the end of a tunnel, I'll reach out and go, hey, my schedule is opening up around this time, just so you know, would love to work with you again. And it is helpful. And it also, if you have projects cancel, it's always like good to know because again, we get these last minute projects of, oh, actually, I really wanted a co-release and it's in 6 weeks from now. So can you slot this in? And knowing that you have that availability, I find as a producer really helpful.
Well, right. And you and I just, we spoke just yesterday to kind of, fit stuff in, because sometimes it's a jigsaw puzzle as to what needs to happen when.
Absolutely. It's a collaboration. And I think, we can get in our head, I think a lot of narrators can get in their head, oh, it's over communication. And I think as long as you're, clear and precise and don't necessarily expect that I'm going to be able to book you, it's just very valuable information for me to have. And I want that information. And as I can use it, I will use it.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So, that gets it. I was going to ask about like if people are on your roster, like how do they stay, what's good communication to stay in touch? I think this availability hits on that. Going back to the building of a roster and getting on it, we talked a little bit about these cold emails, some referrals, word of mouth. For you guys, how much have you found any of these kind of speed dates or other workshop things, good opportunities for you to find people? Or are there other avenues that you've, when you're in search of intentionally trying to expand your roster, like where do you go to do that?
Yes.
Who wants to go first? Yeah, Shane?
Well, we'll start with the smallest person. Mine is typically, I haven't done the speed dating and stuff. I don't think I have the volume of work, like a lyric obviously recorded for that sort of thing. So, but Ahab is a great reference for me if I have a specific, thing that I want, because I can tick a bunch of boxes. There have been other lists, like I might be getting the name wrong, but the people of the global majority, is that the list? It's people of color. It's like narrators of color, basically. And it's kind of all that. So that was a great reference for me. So between that and Ahab, I've used, and then me just browsing Audible a lot.
Yeah.
Like seeing who's doing what, who's recording for whom, who's like authors that I know, who they like, and the pairings. And I'll click on you and I'll start seeing who you've worked with. Because also I have you as a touch point where I could be like, all right, what do you think of so-and-so?
Sure.
I don't really know him. So that's me. That's my smaller process over here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, Katie?
Yeah, definitely. I do that too. I spend hours on Audible. Like sometimes it's embarrassing, or my husband will be like sitting watching TV and I'll just like slowly, quietly put my earbuds in and start like listening to samples. I think I probably spend too much time doing that. But if I'm searching for something specific, there are, narrator listings that are really helpful, like Ahab, even Audiophile magazine. I think a big one too is just on social media. Like if I notice someone starting to become more active and really like trying to push their narration work and really publicizing that, it kind of gets on my radar. So then they're in the back of my mind, and that is where I will search for them, like on Audible, and kind of keep up to date with what they're doing. It doesn't necessarily get them on my roster, but a surefire way is to get on an author's radar. And that certainly does come from social media. So every now and again, I'll find someone on social media and I'll just send it to an author that I'm like, I know, Kristen Proby is going to love this guy. I'll just send it to her. And then she'll start kind of following him too. And then she'll be like, okay, let's do it. That kind of thing. So for lyric in particular, it's a lot of things, but the number one thing is getting on authors' radars for sure. And if not theirs, then mine. Yeah, somehow.
Yeah. I think that the speed dating, like in the APA stuff, that's good to do. I always recommend that when people get in touch with me and they're looking for more outlets, to go ahead and join the APA, go to the mixers, try to do the speed dating. And I used to go to the speed dating when it was in person. I have to be honest, since it's been virtual, I haven't done it as much, only because my own attention for it tends to sort of like glaze over a little bit. But I hope they get back to the in-person stuff, because that was really helpful. And then the other thing I tell folks to do, I think this is still relevant to your question, is to go ahead and join ACX and start to build up their roster there, and do some of that sort of some of that work, shoe leather work on the ground. And then otherwise, I mean, the way we hire most people, it's really word of mouth. And I'll take people that don't have audiobook experience, especially like I said before, if they're theater actors or if they're film and television actors. We don't mind training people. In fact, between Nick and myself, we've done that quite a few times. And sometimes, honestly, we even find that more productive in the long term, because they're people that aren't booked with other audiobook projects.
Sure.
And they're actors that have, sharp chops. And when we train them, they approach audiobooks the way we want them to, right? Because I'm sure everyone here has their own sort of aesthetic that they like to adhere to. And so sometimes that's a helpful, fruitful way for us.
Nice. So, Jeff, you talked about, wanting to give work to people who are on the roster, time and again, if we can. Do actors ever fall off your roster? Like, are there like red flags or things that, talent can do to be
Give me the list.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I mean, I can be very clear about this. The one thing that will get you taken off our list, and it's happened only a handful of times, is if you are unkind to your engineer, to your director. That's the number one. It's only happened a handful of times, but that's a hard, done. And then, of course, there's the usual stuff that we all sort of come up against, right? Obviously, deadlines are important. You got to hit your deadlines, because we're dealing with, and I don't know the volume that you guys are dealing with, but we're dealing with pretty much, I'd say, at Recorded Books proper, we're dealing with about 100 titles a month, right? Then we have like 100 titles to cast each month. And so, yeah, I can't have things be late.
Right.
Yeah. But like I said, if you're a jerk, that's the first reason you're off. If the second reason would be like, you just can't keep to the schedule.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, the uncommunicative is a big one. Like, I can deal with any fire. I can deal with delays and sickness or even last minute pullouts or something. Things happen. We're human. But if I feel like I'm spending more time chasing you to get me an answer, I'm going to be real hard pressed to want to cast you again. It's real tough. What about you, Katie?
Yeah, just seconded. Not much gets you like officially like kicked off our roster. Like, again, because the authors have, like, when you're producing for indie authors, they have such a strong hand in choosing their narrators that if somebody was late and really messed up a production, and then 2 months later an author came to me and really wanted to work with them, my strategy would be more so to be like, hey, just so you know, like, there may be delays. So there's like a kind of like a warning now on your narrator profile with us. And so that way we can kind of like, work to put out fires as they come up, or we can expect the fires and kind of have a contingency plan. But yeah, we would definitely kick someone off our roster if they were a jerk to like an engineer or a producer. Yeah, I think. But I don't think that's ever happened to like that extent yet. Fingers crossed. Jeff definitely works with more people than I do. So
I think we're also pulling people into the studio maybe more than you are, right? So we have, I would say still the majority, I would say at least half of our actors are working in studio. And so there is like daily interaction. They're not just at home, yelling at their wife and their kids. They're yelling at the people that work in the audio world.
What about for you, Shane, as like a smaller studio?
It's exactly the same. It's I haven't had the jerk situation because you're right. Because all the people I use are home studio. So yeah, they can yell whoever they want. I don't necessarily see that bit, but I would feel the same if it happened in person. But it's really, I feel like personally there's the marrying of the talent, the creativity to bring a book to life with a kind of business mindset and an understanding that there are deadlines involved, that it's not just you, that there's a whole system going on. And so we need the audio for post. And so if you delay, then they're delayed. Like they also have a bunch of other projects going on. The authors, especially in indie romance, they're spending money on promo and all of these kind of things. And so if you bugger it up, to use a very English expression, then, and don't tell us, like we don't work together to make it all work, then I'm going to them and saying, oh, sorry now, like I've only just found out that this is now going to be, this is delayed, this, and that, these guys are putting a lot of money, their own money into it. And, it's a lot. So that will kind of, if you don't have that cognition of that fact or don't get it very quickly, then yes, that will make me reticent to work with you. And if I have to work with you, as Katie said, because someone insists, I will preface and say that you may well get delays. And I just going to put it out there from the get-go, and it's up to you if you want to go that route. So then that scuppers that person a bit. I'm not purposefully doing it, but through their own actions, I feel, I've got to then pass that on because I don't want to be holding the baby or whatever that expression is. Looking like,
I don't think that's the expression.
I don't think it is.
Where did this baby come from?
No babies.
For the record, I don't want to be holding the baby either. So don't give him a name.
I don't know what that expression is. There's something about left holding the something that means like you're the one where everyone's like
the bomb, maybe?
Left holding the bag? I don't know. I feel like that's maybe
screaming baby. I don't mean left holding the screaming baby. There we go. So anyway, you get what I mean. It's just put it down to my Englishness.
I would also just say, like, I think it's important that sometimes people think they've been taken off our roster when they have not been taken off our roster. Like there's a weird thing where like someone I can cast one year, like 10 times, the next year, either I don't have the material for them or, we have a lot of approvals from authors, right? So sometimes people think they've been taken off and it's like, I just don't have the work right now.
Right. Yeah. True. I think the only other thing I would add from my experience at Brickshop that, again, doesn't take you off, but puts a flag on your file, so to speak, with the increasing trend of self-records, home records. There's also a technical quality to this idea that we're all in a team, business-minded. There are other people in this chain beside just you. If you can't turn in the files without some key markers, if we're cleaning up every cut because you're not taking your clicks out, and we're adding all this editing time that we set our rates based on what is kind of a standard, and we're doing so much more editing or whatever, and you will refuse a director, because we offer remote directors and we have studio space in the city. So we're like, we can help this. If you don't like this, we can work it in. But that becomes really difficult because it ultimately gums up the works down the line anyways, because it takes that much more time and effort on all parts.
Yep.
Good point.
So speaking a little bit of the change, we've talked about this change and things, shifting gears to talk now more specifically about casting and the process of casting. I'm going to start with you on this one, Jeff. What do you think are some of the biggest changes that you've seen to approach or philosophy to just casting of audiobooks over the years?
Yeah. So even though I've only been the casting director for 7 years, I've been at Recorded Books for 20 years. And when I first started, we had pretty much carte blanche on who we cast. The authors weren't involved that much. And so we were sort of free to run it the way we wanted to. And that's all changed. Obviously authors are a lot more involved now. So that's certainly changed the way that we have approached casting. And then the other ways that things have changed, and this is all really for the best, is that everyone's much more conscious about casting, the appropriate ethnicity, down the line. Whereas before there was sort of a tendency to sort of nod toward Asian. Now we're much more specific about who we use for what.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it definitely does. Just, really being mindful of really what has changed over the years and what influences casting decisions.
Yeah.
Katie, in the time, I know it's a little bit shorter, your involvement, but what have you noticed change?
Yeah, I mean, Jeff mentioned this, but representative casting is the biggest change, I think, in the last, at least since I started, because even when I started in audiobooks 8 years ago, I was in acquisitions for audio rights. And once I acquired something, I didn't have a hand in casting either. It was passed off to a producer and they kind of oversaw things. And even at that time, maybe half of the time, authors had negotiated a clause into their contract that they would have, final say or final approval, at least, on narrators. But now I think maybe those two things are kind of connected. As authors have kind of fought for more of a say in who's being cast, they've been able to be like, hey, this is my story. I'm a Black woman. I want a Black woman to read it. Duh. Which normally you would think doesn't need an explanation. But at that time, I think sometimes there's a disconnect, right? So maybe the person that's reading the script and acquiring it is, and saying yes, pressing go. Once it's handed off to the producer, if you're doing something large scale, sometimes you don't get a chance to actually fully read the book other than, skimming through or understanding the blurb and, the write-up on it. But so I think maybe that's part of how you've seen that shift in traditional publishing. And of course, as that's happened there, it affects all of us, smaller producers and boutique producers like us, which is a really good thing. Yeah. Now, it would be super unheard of and very strange if you didn't cast representatively, and you would get called out, and for good reason. And that's, a big change even from just 8 years ago, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Shane? Maybe as an actor perspective as well, are you noticing sort of change of the approach to casting or anything like that over the years?
Yeah, I mean, I would just mirror the same thing, and that representative casting, the awareness of that is the big change I've seen over the last few years. Because obviously with starting the production company, it's always been authors come to me. Authors have the say because it's not like Recorded Books. So authors are paying the bill, et cetera, et cetera. So it's always been up to them. And it's always been a case of us figuring it out and what they really want. And then, me giving options and they decide. But the representative casting and the awareness of that, and that's been across the voiceover, because I still work across the voiceover industry in gaming and all sorts of other things. And I've noticed it there too. I mean, and we all saw it, famous people giving up, animation roles because they were like, I shouldn't have been doing this, and there just wasn't that mindset. I think it was just glossed over in the voice industry. I would say, because, you don't see the person. So it's just like, oh, that voice fits, but there's a lot more to it. And everyone's become aware of that.
Yeah, most definitely. One thing that I've seen in addition to all of that, I would agree with all of that, is I found, especially working with Authors Direct, that even in the last, 5 years, kind of increasingly so, authors coming to me and being influenced, like we talked earlier, about whether or not these narrators have like a marketing presence online and are going to help
Yes.
spread the word about this book. Whereas before when I started, I used to submit like blind, no names. And I started getting a lot of pushback to that because they really wanted the transparency. Like, I confirmed it checked all the boxes of, identity and whatever. But I really tried to be like super fair and be like blind casting. It was like, no. I need to know who they are. Do they have a presence? And that's something that I really noticed shift. Did you guys notice that in any, maybe Jeff, I don't know if it impacts you as much.
We've definitely had authors and publishers come to us and ask for people with TikTok, a TikTok presence or something, right? But we've pushed back a little bit. But I would say some narrators have been really savvy. Like good narrators have been very savvy about setting up a TikTok presence. So we can be like, hey, here's so-and-so. They're not, maybe not like your idea of a TikTok star, but they've got a real following. I think maybe you guys will disagree with me. I think the jury is still out as to whether that's actually selling a lot of audiobooks or not. I don't know. What I notice is when the author's on social media, that's selling a lot of audiobooks. I'm not always sure if the narrator's presence is the same, but I don't know for sure the answer to that.
I think in romance, there definitely are some. I think Shane is one of them. Like he has a presence. I would say that's outside of just social media, though. Like he has a presence as like just his presence. If you look him up on Audible, you're like, here's this large list and I can listen to any of these and it'll be great. And I think that's kind of where the balance is. Like there are people that are like blowing up on TikTok that have narrated, maybe 5 audiobooks, and those I don't necessarily think are selling. But
yeah, that's kind of my question, right? Because I see too obviously, like there are some people that have these huge followings on Audible based on their work. I'm not always sure if they have huge followings based on their TikTok.
I do think I've heard from authors I work with that TikTok, you're right, like for the author to have a presence. I know one author particularly who just cut her advertising spend in half because of TikTok. And she said it just like, and she's incredible. She's sort of got graphs and everything. And she's like, she showed me and I was like, oh, wow. She's like, so it's been phenomenal for her as an author. I don't know how it translates to narrators, but I do know that I have authors who also tell me that if they have certain people on books, and I'm sure Katie knows as well, then those sell more. Like just automatically, they just sell a bit more. So they typically want certain people at times.
Yeah. I think that it's not a guarantee. Like I've come across this plenty of times that, I think you have to respect the intelligence of the listeners and that it will make them consider a book, look up the author, see if it's for them, if it's a narrator that they know they love. Conversely, if it's an author they love and it's a narrator they don't know, they may consider a new narrator. I think for them, it's a real, mix of those two elements. But I'm always wary when, I'll have an author client come in and go, oh, I really need this person because it's going to guarantee sales. I'm like, well, let's not guarantee. It may help discoverability. You may reach a wider audience. I'm not sure how much that's converting over. It certainly helps, but I don't think it's like a guarantee.
I definitely had people, I think maybe last year with the TikTok thing, asking me about certain people on TikTok. But all I was hearing were sound bites. And I had to kind of explain that I don't know if that, like, we can explore it, but I don't know. I'm not seeing any other work. I'm not seeing that this person can take an entire book, an entire character, and create, make it come to life. I have no idea. So I had to kind of because there was just this sort of, oh my God, everyone's going crazy for their voice, but it's like a 15-second clip. I was like, that does not a book make. So I had to have those discussions.
Right. No, most definitely. Do you find that when, this is more specific to romance, and ones that have a lot of dual. Do you find that pairing somebody who maybe has more of a presence or popularity with a lesser known, newer narrator, like, does that negatively impact things? Is that a good thing? Do you have any kind of insight on that, Katie?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, actually, I think it's a really positive thing. I suggest it a lot, especially if we're kind of working with budgetary restraints. So maybe we're, working with a bigger name who a lot of people will follow almost no matter what they read. Then I might pair them with like a newer to us narrator who's at a lesser rate. And then it kind of evens out the budget, but also helps to meet some of those expectations of, discoverability, as you put it, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, this question is, I'm going to pitch to you, but I think everybody else could have input on this, to this idea of looking up people, whether or not it's, they were really big on TikTok, you go to Audible to see where they're at. When you look up an actor and they seem to only have one type of genre, or for those of us that work more specifically in romance, like one type of romance subgenre, does that impact your decision to cast them in something? Does it really matter? Like, should narrators be really trying to diversify if they don't want to only narrate in one thing? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think it will impact only in that if the project has author approval over the narrator, then I need to present the author with samples, right? And so if I don't see a lot of samples from different genres, that is going to limit what I can put somebody up for. A lot of times I'll recommend, when people are getting started, and maybe you guys feel differently about this, but sometimes I'll tell people to not use pseudonyms. I'll be like, if you really want to get started here, like, put as much as you're comfortable putting under your own name. So I have more things, right, that I can present somebody with.
Yeah, I agree. I just had this. Sorry, I have a TMZ or somebody. Not for me, but every now and then, they come over. I don't know. Can you hear me properly?
Yeah, we can now.
I just to point to Jeff. That's when I have to stop recording. By the way. When they're that close. But I had this. I advised somebody. We just finished the fourth book in this series over the last maybe year and a half or something, and I did the same thing. I advised a guy. I said, he's newer, he's done some stuff, but I said, I would use your real name. I said, because he wanted to use a pseudonym, and I said, because I think it's going to be very popular. I think also the cover art isn't. I mean, for branding wise, the cover art isn't going to be just sort of a muscly man with his top off, so it's not going to upset the cart in that respect. And it worked out well for him. He just said as we finished, he said, thanks for that advice, because I've had so many other people come to me because my name is on this particular one, and it's also associated with some other people who are well known. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of like helped shove him along, and I think that's very true.
Mm-hmm. Katie, what about you? When you go under the romance umbrella, there are a lot of subgenres of romance. And if somebody's like, I'm only doing fantasy romance, so every title, has that look, has that energy. Do you think that even under romance that there's, that kind of bias of only seeing one type you see pop up?
Yeah, definitely. If I go, to Audible and I find a new narrator and I click on their name and then I see everything is fantasy romance or everything is dark romance and I'm casting a rom-com, I will pretty much immediately exit out of it. It's nothing like against them, but I'm just like, okay, they don't have, like, maybe they have a good fan following, but it's in this subgenre. It doesn't like follow them over here, or it might not. Also, if I'm listening, like I might listen to one or two samples, but I'm assuming when I look at that list that that's like what their preference is, whether or not that's true. I know that's not always the case, but sure. I'm assuming that's their preference. And I'm also assuming that's like where they're most comfortable performing. So if you really like performing dark romance and that's like how, you're hitting it out of the ballpark with your performances, I don't know if that necessarily transfers over into something like a rom-com or something more contemporary or, and I'm not to say that it doesn't, but I haven't like seen proof when I look at that list. So I'll just kind of make it easier on myself and get out of there.
I have a question for you guys, actually, Jeff and Katie, on that though. But because I come from an actor's perspective as well, like Sam is sort of so I know that you can get known for one thing or whatever, but there's like with actually Samantha, we worked together, and I was like, well, your samples on Audible skew kind of a bit older, I think, than I was looking for. But I know that you have like all of this. So she did me a sample where she sounded perfect, like just not quite like what the Audible was skewing. And so I would ask, I'm curious whether you would actually, if you liked the sound of it, would you reach out and get a sample for something that was a little different to, what you actually were seeing?
Definitely.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Kate.
Sorry, it's okay. Go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to say, I actually just asked Samantha to do that. What was that, yesterday, right?
Yeah.
I was like, I know you're right for this thing. I just need you to read the book for a minute or two so I can convince this person. But this has become a little frustrating to us at Recorded Books because it used to be like we would cast people like they were like repertory actors. Like we knew, like we could say, yeah, Shane's a funny guy and he's a romance guy. And because we decide, we can cast him in anything we want. But that's really shifted now. And so, I don't have time to get samples from everybody, nor do I always feel comfortable, honestly, asking actors to make a specific audition, because I feel like I'm sort of sometimes wasting people's time when I want to be respectful that we're all busy. So I'll sooner find representative samples on Audible, but of course that just sort of like perpetuates the problem that everybody is sort of narrowed into their own subgenre, which kind of sucks. Anyway, Katie, I'm sorry. What did you
It's all right. I definitely will. I think that if I am just like kind of trolling the list to find like a few names to pitch to an author with like where I am like just focusing on samples, then I won't. But if it is something where I know that the author has a particular sound in mind, that's when I'll reach out and I'll do auditions, because much like Jeff said, I love doing auditions because I love our team calls it detective mode. I love when somebody's like, okay, they need an Australian accent, but the hero's South African. And also the mom has a French accent. I'm like, ooh, this is complicated. I love it. So I like trying to find those, and I like getting auditions for stuff like that. But I don't, for something where I know that they can just listen to a sample and get a good feel if it's similar, I usually won't request an audition, mostly because I don't want to, because I'm like, oh, I don't want you to have to go and record it. And also, when you get, let's say 5 auditions from 5 different narrators, you have to turn 4 people down, and that's never fun.
It also sets up precedents sometimes too with a specific, publishing house or author, where it's like, well, I don't want to set up the precedent that for all 50 of your books this year, I'm going to find 4 discrete auditions. That would be a lot of work. I do it for some.
I would just add on that personally, I don't know about anyone else, but that's also where it's on narrators. It's good to have a website or some kind of very easily found presence where you do have a bunch of different stuff. So if your Audible is skewing one way, then I can at least, and that's sometimes when I'll hear a voice. If I just type in your name and put narrator, often like the people who are with it, I get their website and then I've got all of this other stuff. So I'm not just reliant on Audible. And so that can be the decider. And that's decided for me with some people. I was like, I like this voice, but I'm not seeing that much stuff. And then I found their website like that, and they've put all of this stuff out, and accents and funny stuff and dark stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. So
that's a great point. People should do that. True. Yeah, that would be helpful to all of us.
Especially for pseudonyms. I hate it when you're like, when you're searching for a pseudonym for like days, you're just like, I'm emailing people and like trying to find out. Yeah.
When you're playing Name This Voice. Yeah.
Well, I want to add one thing to this discussion before I'm going to ask each of you sort of a little bit more like technically what your casting process kind of looks like. But, coming from my kind of narrating, because we mentioned me a couple times now, as somebody who works under my own name in a lot of different genres, I did start, Jeff, as you were talking about, putting romance under there. And then as that started to become its own entity and there were more abs than there were nonfiction titles, I said, okay, well, this is like a place like that it can hold its own and develop that. But it did, Jeff, we've had this conversation a number of times where, I'm trying to get more of X, Y, or Z in my portfolio and updating samples and being really proactive. I think to this idea of advice of how somebody can break out of these things, I absolutely agree that a website with samples is the way to go. I shamefully have like a reminder that I snooze maybe every week that is pull your samples for your site instead of just, a link to Audible. But I think that is really important because as a producer, I do use that often. I think it's also helpful for anybody who's, working with you as a co-narrator or on a multicast if they need a quick sample of your vocal energy. So I think it's really important. But I also think being proactive, like if there's something that you genuinely want to work on more, I think whether or not it's finding it through platforms like ACX and saying, okay, I'm a big name in this genre, but I'm going to start doing nonfiction so that those titles, come up.
I think that's right, because more and more, and it sounds like Shane and Katie do this maybe more than I do, but more and more I have to get the author on board with somebody. And so I need the tools to do that. And if I don't have enough work to sort of help you build up your resume on your own, then you finding stuff from ACX in the genre you want to work on, that's helpful. That's helpful. And I also want to say there's plenty of reasons to keep your romance name separate from your regular name. Like I'm totally on board with people who do that. But if you're looking to get started, one way is to just put everything under your own name. So there's more of you there.
Definitely. So I'm going to kick this one off because I think I'm actually the weird duck in this group and maybe now kind of feeling like a little bit of an asshole. But for the idea of like what your casting process actually looks like, we've talked a lot about how authors are more and more involved. For us over at Brickshop, there's a couple publishers that we work with, and in the nonfiction space, they're really pretty specific about the subject matter and the voice of the author and matching talent with that identity. Some of the romance stuff that we do, I wish that I had a little bit more information oftentimes because I don't always get the chance to deeply scan these books and dig into them. I certainly don't read every book that we're casting. But for the most part, they come in and they do expect to hear samples. So they want, and I don't know if this is the advent of ACX, and we work with a lot of self-publishing authors that have that expectation of, well, I can put something up and I can hear the voices doing my words. But more and more, I've really gotten a lot of pushback. And so I ask for a lot of auditions. And for myself as a narrator, I don't mind because it's like, I view that I have a fairly versatile voice. So I appreciate the opportunity to be able to give you something that feels specific to the text, but I know not everybody has that time or wants to deal with, okay, well, we've gone ahead and cast this. You can free up the time because everything's moving so fast. And it'd be great if I felt like I could just submit, but I feel like I do get a lot of pushback from our clients. So I collect those auditions, I give them to them. The author has final approval, and then we go from there. But that's what I think a little bit of a jerk process now. Now I want to go back and rethink how we're doing this.
I don't think that's a jerk process. I think you're doing a good service to your authors,
Yeah, definitely.
What about you, Shane, on your smaller shows? Is it more of starting with a conversation and submission? How much do you know the text before you're doing it?
Yeah, for me, it's I tend to I keep getting newer people, but I also have a kind of a core group of people that I just know them and I know what they like, and so I typically don't have to ask for samples on that. They trust my recommendations and they will go to Audible, and as long as they like the voice and I say they can totally, they'll be great at all the emotional journey, blah, 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 then we're good to go. For me though, typically say it's maybe there's someone newer, then I always have a form that they fill out about the book and the characters, who the people are, because it's typically the main characters that I want to know, like who is the guy, because it's always dual, right? But I mean, predominantly with romance anyway, or multi. So I want to know who the people are and kind of what just qualities, just general. I don't want to overload authors because I've already got a bunch of stuff going on. But I was like, if you give me that information, you're going to help me help you. And then accent requirements, whether anyone's POC, etc. Just that information. I take that and then I'll kind of go away and work on it, and then I'll come back with suggestions. And then if we need a sample, if someone's maybe a little newer or they don't know them as well, or they like them but they want to make sure, then I'll get a sample. Sometimes it can be, can they handle the more like racy stuff? I think, because sometimes someone's zippy and they're great, but it's like, is the the romance scene gonna fall flat.
Yeah. Which is a unique skill. I mean, it really
it is. It takes some practice. I can tell you. So yeah.
There's a certain monitor I feel that I can hear in voices that they've been very, I think a lot of narrators come through and say, oh yeah, I could definitely do romance. And you hear them and you're like, yeah, everything up to the point where it becomes this very intimate action scene. And you can just hear in their voice, their self-consciousness.
Maybe a disconnect. Yeah. I think, and for a lot of what I do, conversationality is just really key. I mean, I don't think anyone really wants to have a book read to them anymore, whatever genre maybe, but there are very different styles. But romance specifically, I think, has got to have that, like, come in, I'm going to hang out with me kind of vibe.
Particularly the first person POV stuff.
A lot of it's first person, yeah. And
sure.
Dialogue and everything. So I look for that a lot. Like, that's really key.
Katie, what about you and your process? Because you're still, working with primarily new releases from authors directly.
Yeah, very similar to Shane. We have a form. Try to get as much as we can out of the characters and at that point. But yeah, sometimes they're booking like a year in advance and they're just like, I don't know, I'm writing it. I haven't written it yet. I'm writing I'm writing the first book in the series and this is for the third book. But one thing I'll add is I really like to find out the tropes and if there's any content warnings, just because that will take some people off of my list. And the tropes are good to know just because like certain tropes you just say and I think of a certain narrator, and I know authors are the same way. But yeah, I would say authors are kind of the ones who dictate what our casting process is like. So for all of the authors I produce with, the way I work with them is very individual and dependent on what they're looking for. So for some of them, it's more like, here's my list, here's who I'm thinking, and they'll go through and then they'll select. Some of them are just like, okay, I want Shane East and Samantha Brentmoor, go. And then other ones, we do the auditions. And for that, yeah, I mean, just like Shane was saying, the best samples to pull are the ones where there's lots of dialogue and hopefully at least a little bit of action, so that we can kind of get a feel for what the narrator's like. And I do still like doing blind auditions. So when we do go over to the auditioning process, I do blind auditions. If they ask after they've listened, like, oh, is this, Joe Arden? I'll be like, yeah. Like I might tell them if they've guessed it. But other than that, I do like to keep it blind. And the authors completely dictate how we do it. And that's kind of how I like to do it. That way we know that they're ending up with the voice and like the expectations that they have are being met.
Jeff, it's probably a little bit different for you because I know you do a lot of backlist titles. There is more and more author involvement, but how does your casting process look like?
Yeah, I mean, we're mostly at Recorded Books. We're mostly front list. It's just that romance is like a really small part of what we're doing, right? We're producing many more young adult novels, fiction and literature, Western sci-fi. And so I guess to a certain extent, the genre dictates how we cast, but I would say we're reading far more of these books than I think people realize. Like, between Nick and I, we really do read these books. I can't say we read every word, but we read a lot of them. And then from there, we're kind of, I think in a way, and maybe it's because we've been doing this more, that I think that we sort of feel like we know best. And so while we want the author's involvement, we do kind of come in strong with who we think should do things based on their acting chops. For the romance, 100% personality is key. Like we really do look for people that come in with that they have a propulsive energy and that they bring a lot of personality to it. Because to my ear, like that's where a lot of the romance, lives or dies. But yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah,
right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually want to bounce off that to everybody else. As we are all listening for different voices, are there certain qualities that you are really listening for as people are submitting them or giving samples? And I know it's always specific to the genre or the book or anything like that. I can say for myself, there's a certain ease that I think speaks a little bit to conversationality, and you can still be presentational if that's what the book demands, and still feel conversational. But there's an ease that I listen for in a read that I think is easier for a listener as well. That really can like make or break putting you like as a front runner for me. I don't know, Jeff, is there something, in addition to what you've already mentioned, that stands out for you as a voice while you're listening?
I really want people to be using their full voice. Like this thing sometimes happens when you're auditioning somebody and they come in and they have all this energy and they're using, their full range, and then they get in front of the microphone and it all sort of flattens out to this. And that just feels really boring to me. So yeah, I mean, that's what I want. And I want to make sure that their brain is connected to their mouth, that they're thinking about everything they're saying and that they have a point of view on it. That it's that acting work is happening, not necessarily like voiceover work, that real acting.
Sure. Shane, do you listen for something, particularly as somebody who has a native accent and is probably casting people with accents? Is there something in your ear that you're listening for that like makes somebody stand out or be like, oh no, you said you could do this accent, but you can't?
Accent-wise, I don't think about the accent stuff doesn't come to me so much. It's more what you said, the ease of it. And I just think with experience and having listened to myself and, like you guys listen to so many people at this point, there's a connection to the material that you can hear in someone's voice. Yep. Whether it's a bit more presentational, whether it's a first person, third person, zippy or more drawn out, whatever it is, like there's just a connection. And, that comes, I think you have to have that ability off the bat really to be a good narrator, but it gets better and better, I think, for people as it goes on. But you can hear that, I think, in people. And that's really what I am looking for. When that disconnect happens, it's not, especially for romance as well, it's not really going to work.
Yeah.
Like maybe come back in a while if that's clicked for you.
Yeah, sure. Katie, is there anything else you'd add that feels like fundamental to romance narration for what you're listening for?
Yeah, big time. So I'm a romance reader. And if I listen to an audition and it makes me like blush or like, I don't know, if it has like a swoon factor, like it makes me kind of laugh or giggle or feel uncomfortable because I'm in public or I'm like, there's people around me, that feels good. I'm like, that's a good sign. Like, am I enjoying this audition too much? That's a good sign. The other thing for me that's like a really big deal is just because, like Shane said, so many projects are dual. I want to hear how they're portraying the opposite sex. As long as it's not like they're portraying a character, they're not portraying like a caricature, and they're also consistent. So sometimes I'll start an audition thinking, oh, wow, this is perfect. Like this, female narrator is doing this perfect, like growly hero voice. But then halfway through, that starts being dropped off a little bit and it's not like maintained in the same way. That's like something that I'll listen for. So yeah, swoon and consistency, I guess.
I love that. So I've just a couple questions to wrap us up. I'm cutting myself off because I'm so long-winded and I could spend all afternoon digging into these things with you guys. So this is me showing restraint. But just a couple questions to wrap us up. As you think about, we've talked about a lot of ways for people to reach out and engage, with us as producers or producers elsewhere. But like, magic wand, if you could make every narrator that you work with or could possibly engage with, like do one thing as a part of their work, like what would that thing be for you? I will say, if you are somebody particularly, if you're somebody who has, less represented identities, do not be afraid about reaching out to anyone. I found for myself in my work, once I started being explicit about my Persian identity, work absolutely came in places that I did not expect because it was very clearly an identity that was a need. And I thought, these characters don't exist. This work doesn't exist. It does. And I want to cast you in it. So reach out, tell me as much as you're comfortable. We have a form that we watch stuff, keep track of narrator information. And I want that. I want to deepen that bench as much as possible. And for fans of romance or anything, as much as I engage with them in this community, as you find newer voices, because I want that bench of people who are ready next week, definitely flag those for me. I love that stuff. What about you, Shane?
One thing I would say for narrators to do, is that was the question? I was paying attention, I promise.
No, I was I spun around like 5 times. And then I answered my own question.
Yeah. I would honestly circle back to having a presence and being findable for me. Like I said, even if that's just some kind of website with some samples, then for me, that's like, I'm finding that is valuable in terms of people I don't know, or in terms of people that are lesser known or building up stuff. So that would be my rec as just in general, to just have that. And especially like Kate said, if you've got a pseudonym, I mean, everyone's comfort level is different. I don't think there's any, some of it's personal, right? Some people don't want family to know, or, they want to keep things very separate, or they do a certain job outside of narration. But yeah, having an ability to find you some way, either whether that means you have a pseudonym website, so I am contacting you as, whatever your name is, then I can find you. So for me specifically in romance, that's my thing. To have some kind of thing
bare
like
minimum, just Samantha Brentmoor. Here's my email. Like, even
some
if you only do that,
and that's
one social media channel. If it's not a website, just like something like
help me find you.
Help me help you, Katie. If there's something you could have every narrator that you work with do, what would that be?
I definitely agree with Shane. If I were to think about narrators I already work with, like what I wish they would do, I would love to see. This is not a big deal.
Is this a pointed answer?
No.
Yes, listening.
This is not a pointed answer, but it's not just self-serving, although it is a little bit self-serving. I would love to see narrators who are already active on social media tag the production company that they worked with when they are posting about an audiobook project. Obviously, in the self-serving way, if they tag Lyric, we will, that's good, but also we will share it. We will make sure we interact with it. But if I saw, a narrator who is kind of newer to me, but they're active on social media and they tagged, let's say East House Productions, that is going to be an automatic green flag for me. Because I'm like, okay, this has, Shane's approval. He's obviously has taste and good romance sense. So now I know, okay, this person is on his radar. That's a green flag to me. So I'd love to see that a little bit more, because sometimes I see stuff come up and I'm just like, well, who is this book from? Like, where was it produced? Is it on ACX, or is it is it through Brick Shop? Like, I'd love to know. Is it through Recorded Books? I would still incorporate publishers into that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Also, I just want to quickly say, I think it's bold to say that Shane has taste, but we'll let it go, for now.
That's fine.
One man's goal.
Jeff, what about you? Narrators that you work with or could work with, if there's one thing you could have them do.
Look, most of the narrators we work with are awesome. I have very few complaints about anybody. Everyone in this industry, for the most part, is really nice and really thoughtful. I would just, encourage people to keep in touch with us, even if you're not hearing back. If you're building your roster on Audible and you're getting work and you have a hole in your schedule, always reach out. That's, I guess that's what I would say. Stay in touch.
Nope.
Did we lose him?
If you have a hole in your schedule, reach out.
Yes.
He's got an excellent
he's back.
Yeah. Okay, you're back. You're back. So I want to Rose flag something. There's a very active, as we mentioned earlier, conversation that's happening while we've been chatting. One thing that kept coming up again is this idea actually about accents and actors, who say, yes, I can do this accent. So let's wrap up a little bit more on this idea of what narrators can do for us. How do we approach accents? How do we trust people can do those accents? How much work are we doing, when we're getting books that require a lot of them? Jeff, I feel like this probably comes up in all the different genres that you work with, but maybe, you're very familiar with your roster and what they can do or not do.
Yeah, I mean, we really try to cast like, British people to read British books. Like we really don't want people doing big accents, right? We really want to be casting people for where they're located. If the book takes place in Georgia, well, ideally we have an actor who was, raised in Georgia or has family but obviously there's accent work to do within the book. And then we just want subtle accents. I don't want to hear anything that sounds like it's too much. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, well, and I think as we previously noted, I think there's no way that we can ever, I certainly can't as an actor give you every accent that shows up. Let's say it's a book that kind of tours the world. We have to trust that I can do it and that I'm being truthful about it. But do you find, Katie, that there are people in your experience that have like overreached or overcommitted when they've said that they could do those things? Does that come up a lot?
It hasn't come up for me yet. I think I've been pretty lucky, I guess. But I think narrators tend to be err on the side of caution more than anything else. Like I haven't been oversold. I'll have people say, "Oh, I'm not sure if I can do an Australian accent. I did do like 2 years of coaching with this person all about Australian accents, but maybe." So I find they'll undersell themselves almost more than oversell, at least so far for me. And yeah, that's kind of where I'll just ask, if they tell me they can do an accent, but they're not a native speaker of that language or from that place, then I just, ask like, "Oh, how is it that you can do this accent?" That usually tells me a lot. If they mention PJ Oakland and a few sessions with him or something, then I know that's a green flag. And especially if I can kind of see a demonstrated ability in the books that they already have listed on Audible. And especially, I think, again, this is very romance specific, but with so many dual narrations, I think a lot of people are really good about being honest. Like, "Hey, I can do a Scottish accent. I'm happy to do like a secondary character or portray like the other MC, but I don't want to read like if my MC isn't is American, I don't feel comfortable reading like the whole book with accent." As long as they're open about it, and so far everyone I've worked with has been, it's been fine.
Yeah. Shane, anything that you would add to this accent discussion and lying or not lying actors, or how you verify?
Don't lie.
Don't lie, basically.
Don't lie. But I agree. People often will sell themselves shorter rather than longer in this game. But I actually specifically put into my narrator database, I asked everybody what they felt comfortable with in the first person. And typically, being a Brit, I'm working with some London authors and stuff. So, it's a little different, I think, sometimes for us. Like, are you English but comfortable doing Scottish as a first person? And all that. So those kind of things came up for me a lot. So I wanted to get people's input. And I allowed people to tell me what they feel comfortable with as a first person, or what they feel comfortable in a dual book, whether if the other guy or girl is, American or British or whatever they are, Australian, etc. Do you feel comfortable with that? And, I found people have pretty much been pretty honest. Some people are like, "I just want to do American accents. I'm good with all of those." And if there's something specific, I tend to trust people who I have experience to do, there's a couple of scenes with a Brazilian character. It's like, okay, I trust that you can figure that one out. Like, because I think I know for myself, and that's what a lot of people say. If it gets a bit more heavy with the accent, then yes, I probably need to hear something, especially if it's the opposite character. You know what I mean? If you're going to be doing this opposite yourself, like I need to hear that you can swap back and forth. So I need to hear that. I won't just take it off someone's word.
Sure.
In that respect.
Yeah, which goes a little bit back to Jeff's point that as much as possible, I think we talk a lot about identity casting, but I think accents are, somebody's identity. And if you can find somebody who is a native, from Georgia or Texas, you're in trouble when somebody's like a Southern accent. You're like, how how many dialects of the South there are? There's many. And it's great if you can find somebody who has that direct experience. It adds something, I think, fundamentally, to the work in a way when you can.
It's all a balancing act, right? Especially, I would say, with the romance as well, especially because then you want certain people to do it. So then, you know what I mean? Like, if you want a specific Georgia person, but then you want, whatever, for example, then I don't know. So it's like, okay, let's marry this up.
Well, I kind of think that's a good point, is that you don't want to get so lost in specificity casting that you're not thinking about the performance anymore. And we certainly wrestle with that. As much as we want to keep it specific, we also want to make sure that we're hiring a good performer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Very well said. And a difficult balancing act. I think it's a real refined alchemy, certainly to get right. Okay, last question before we wrap up. This one may be a really tough one, but is there anything that you are currently or recently casting, you can give specifics or not as you're able to, that you're either really proud of or excited to be casting and working on?
Yes, I'll start.
Okay.
I'm like that person. I could probably go on for like an hour about this kind of stuff, but two projects come to mind. So one of my favorite things is like finding a new narrator combo that hasn't happened yet. And like bringing those two together, just because that feels very romance. And so that's a fave of mine. A recent fave with Samantha Brentmoor is with Robert Hatchett.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm Yours by Claire Contreras. I just really like him, and obviously I like you. So pairing you together and just being the producer on that project, like I got all the behind the scenes, like back and forth, and like seeing the way that you two played together, I was like, okay, this is like a match made in heaven. This is a great combo. So that felt really good. And you know, when that happens, it's really great because it just kind of sets in my mind, like the wheels turning, like, okay, who else should I pair them with? But also, how do I get these two back together for something soon?
Mm-hmm.
And then secondarily, I would say, I'm just going to say casting combos. My other one that I just want to like name drop, I guess, is Blind Date with a Book Boyfriend by Lucy Eden.
Uh-huh.
Oscar Reyes and Wesley Siobhan, holy smokes, like they did duet. And I called in for the first session. And I mean, I think Wesley might just have charisma and like, you know, magnetism and just like can build that tension with everyone. But they were just so good together. Like they were so funny. I was laughing the whole time. It was really great to listen to. And there's another one that I just cast, but I can't really announce, but it's a T.L. Swan book. The accents are very complicated. The narrator search was very in depth. I think I gathered like 18 auditions just for the male narrators. And it's also going to be in duet, and I'm very excited. I think people are going to lose their minds when they hear it.
Minds blown. The romance community won't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it for me.
Shane, anything you're working on that you're casting or recently cast that you're proud or excited about?
I'm proud of all of them because I don't want anyone to listen to this.
Of course.
I love them all very much. I guess just off the top of my head, I was very pleased with how I did for Nikki St. Crow. We did a multicast Peter Pan retelling called the Lost Boys series. Started with the Never King. And it's a very dark retelling of Peter Pan. So I love the story. I think just the key things that I liked about it was the fact that she came not with a specific idea for the audio. And it was a really nice to be able to kind of suggest different ways that we could do this that she hadn't really seen it as. Mm-hmm. And I really enjoyed that process. And she kind of loved that and how the casting changed. And also it was a book where we could do smaller parts and bring other people in. That's kind of what I was talking about earlier. Get newer people in among bigger names and that's now kind of worked for them and people have seen them and stuff. So I'm really proud that that's kind of come together and everybody likes the series.
It's a great project.
Yeah.
Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple ones. I guess I get the most excited when like we've teamed up a good narrator with a good book where we're like, oh, these are both like really. We have Cassandra Campbell just did a book called The Biography of X, which is great. Mm-hmm. We've got Mia Baron reading a book called My Men that's about a Swedish serial killer that's also just like awesome.
Amazing.
So that's the sort of stuff that I enjoy. Yeah. When we get like get the good stuff and you can hook it up with somebody that's really right for it.
Yeah, because, I mean, let's not forget that, you know, as we work with narrators so often, you know, it is a job and there's, you know, not every book is going to be the one, you know, you care and you put yourself into everyone. But when you can get that casting just right, where you feel like this is the absolute best voice that, you know, I can't imagine anybody else and they're really connecting to it in a way like that. When that magic happens, it is so deeply satisfying. So yeah, totally agree with that. Well, thank you guys so much for spending the afternoon with me. The birds have been lovely. So have the planes overhead. Thank you. It's been great.
Thank you so much for joining us for the second Rosemoor Roundtable. Our next episode will focus on marketing for romance audiobooks. You can follow all of today's guests on social media or find them on their websites, which we've linked in the details. To keep up with what's next on the Rosemoor Roundtable, you can subscribe to this podcast on the app you're listening to now, or follow myself, Rose Dioro, at RoseDioroVO, or Samantha Brentmoor at Ms_Brentmoor on your social media platform of choice, where we will both enthusiastically be promoting the next discussion. Thank you to Brickshop Audio, our producer and distributor for the podcast. And thank you for listening. See you next time.